Rabbi Richard, do you have some story to share with us about friendship with someone of other religions? What example it was for your life? What it changed in your life? Have you some personal example to share with us?
Well, in my case, the simplest example is where it starts. Because in some ways, what introduced me to my Jewishness goes back to being educated in a Quaker school. And in my case, my family was not Jewishly identified. They were Jewish, but they were not Jewishly identified. And in the home I grew up, there was nothing Jewishly identified. We didn't celebrate Jewish holidays. We celebrated Christmas. And there was nothing that would have made me be aware of that I was Jewish except by perhaps definition. But I went to a Quaker prep school, and the person who taught religion there was the person who had been the Quaker representative at the Nuremberg trials. Now you have to understand that I graduated high school in 1962, which means that this took place in the 50s. So the 50s was quite contemporaneous. And that was quite a significant event in the world. And I have no idea what happened then. But I will tell you that that's what awakened me to the fact that I was Jewish. It led me to study religion in university. It led me to rabbinical school. It led me to teach theology at university level. But I know for sure that something in my relationship with this high school teacher was profoundly transformative. But the reason I start with that is because for me, the very definition assumes that someone from another religion is other. And that's not my reality. That's not my experience. For me, I don't stop and define people that way. So the question of someone saying, well, can you think of friendships with others? Yes, I can think of lots of friendships with people, and I'll give a couple more examples if you wish. But it doesn't start from the assumption that somebody who is another religion is other than I am. And I think, and I don't know if that's unique because I know that people have many different backgrounds, but I do think that many of the people that come from within religious commitment do start from a stronger personal religious base. And dealing with people from other religions is something that's added onto it at a later point. Whereas in my case, it's the other way around. Being a part of a larger society with people of different religions was the starting point. Learning about my Jewishness emerged later. It's not accidental, I think, if I can just expand a little bit, it's not accidental that when I finished rabbinical school, or even during rabbinical school, I did special study in comparative Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Roman law. And even afterwards, I participated in a university interfaith chaplaincy. I was associate university chaplain at an Ivy League university in the United States. Not Jewish chaplain. I was Jewish. I was employed because I was Jewish, but I was associate university chaplain and working with the other chaplains. I think that was a natural thing for me to be a part of that context, as opposed to saying, I'm only going to work with the Jewish community. I'm only going to work in that setting. So that's been very much a reality. Even playing it up to the present day, and if I may, and that is, were you to come to our home on a Friday night, on a Sabbath, on a Shabbat, then the people that come on any given Friday night can be from any kind of backgrounds. They can be from different religious backgrounds, they can be from different socioeconomic backgrounds, they can be from different age groups. Neither Marilyn nor I think in terms of these objective distinctions. It's a matter that we live in an interesting world. We learn from people. We share things in different kinds of ways with different people depending on how we know them and where we know them. But I don't think either one of us, and certainly I don't think in terms of somebody is other than I am, therefore can I have a friendship with them. It's so natural and organic to my own identity that it just emerges.
But do you think that do you feel a difference when you have a friendship with someone Jewish or someone in another religious? What is the difference for you? Not difference about.
I would say
it brings you something else when you share a deep friendship with someone who is Jews or someone is not Jews?
I hear the question, so let me respond to that. I think it's an interesting question, and it's an interesting way to formulate the question. And in this sense, if Mirla were sitting here, and those who are watching should know that my life is really made complete because of Mirla. But if Mirla were sitting here, she would give a different answer than I would. Because Mirla came from a very deep-seated Jewish background, not Orthodox, but very Jewish. Her father is a professor of Yiddish and is a rabbi, and her mother would run Jewish camps, and she spent a lot of time in Israel. And so the Jewish experiential part is totally who she is. So I think that she would probably give a different answer than I would to this question. But I would argue that, in my experience, the issue isn't Jewish versus non-Jewish. I think that the issue is, what do we share? Because just because someone is Jewish, we may have very little in common. We may have different religious ideas. We may have different political ideas. We may have different socioeconomic experiences. So I don't think that the starting point is necessarily Jewish. There's certain, given my career, at this point I've had a rabbinic degree for 40 some years, and I did work in the Jewish world, and I worked in this world, so it's naive to somehow say that it's not relevant in any way. And so there are certain experiences with certain Jews that there is a shorthand for. But we know that if we invite people to our home for a holiday or Shabbat, we know that it is as likely as not that the Jewish person is not experienced with what's going to happen as the non-Jewish person. We will sometimes have non-Jewish guests who are more familiar with the Shabbat rituals and the Sabbath rituals than a Jewish person who may never have experienced it before, or may have experienced it in a different way than perhaps we do it. As I say, I don't want to somehow come across as pretending that 40 some years of experience in the rabbinate, even though, as you know, it's not what I do now, but 40 plus years in the rabbinate has no impact in how I perceive things. But I still want to come back to the articulation of the question. It doesn't ring true to the way we experience people. We just experience, because if you're Jewish, you may come from many different backgrounds. If you're non-Jewish, you can come from different backgrounds. When Leonard Koskinen, just to take a name of somebody who's here, came to our home for Shabbat, it was as natural and warm and inclusive as if somebody who was a chief rabbi were sitting at our table.
So you mean that you can have a deep relationship with someone and also spiritual, you can share the spiritual issues with someone in other religions without any difficulties or any difficulties?
Not only without any difficulties.
You can go far with someone in friendship. It's not important what is his religion.
So let me, I hear you. I want to answer in two ways. The first way is an underlying understanding that I have, which I think informs the answer to the second part. And that is that perhaps because of who I am, perhaps because of the roles I've played in my life, I believe in a profound way that while you can have full and complete meaning from within your own tradition, it is impossible to have complete understanding of your own tradition except in relationship to the other. So in my case, the way I would articulate it is it's a mandate. I don't believe that this kind of experience is somehow an option. It's a mandate if I want to fully understand myself in the tradition that I take seriously for myself. So if I say that, then obviously I'm open to a tremendous diversity of those experiences, whether it's spiritual, whether it's educational, whether it's friendship. I don't think those distinctions necessarily are definitive or predictive, but they emerge out of a combination of personalities and where you meet people and what the combinations are. We're sitting here at the fifth meeting of the Board of World Religious Leaders, and there are people that I see only every 2 years. And I feel such warmth and affection to them. I consider them the deepest of friends, even though I may not see them except every 2 years. And I don't feel that that's strange, and there are people that I may see much more regularly that I may feel less warmth toward or less affection toward, that there's less automatic sharedness with, and so I think that I don't think that's a peculiar kind of experience. Clearly, there are certain things that there's shorthands for. If somebody has a certain Jewish background and you come to a holiday, or you come to a rite of passage, if everyone has that educational experience, then maybe there's a shorthand to not having to explain it. But ironically, we live in a world where that's not a given even within the Jewish world any more than it's a given in the Christian world. Or, if one goes in the West, I'm not speaking to other parts of the world, if one goes to a wedding in the West, the likelihood is that somebody hands out a piece of paper to explain what's going to happen. Now, 2 generations ago, it would never occur to anybody to do that. Because the assumption is that everyone who would be coming there would be familiar one way or another with the rites of passage that were about to happen. Whether they knew them intellectually, whether they knew them academically, whether they knew them in a profound way, they would be familiar with what was going to be taking place and how to behave and how to dress and what would be expected and what time to show up. But today that's not a given for anybody. And so one can go to a Jewish wedding where both people are Jewish, and it's necessary to hand that out because there can be no assumption that the people coming have common experience and common backgrounds. And I think we have to take that very seriously when we think about the other. In some ways, all of us in the Western world come from an atomized experience. We come from a sense where we seek meaning confronted with anomie. And so that therefore the distinctions between us frankly are not the objective definitional ones of another faith, but rather what are the combination of experiences that the other person brings to the table and brings to the seat and brings to the experience. And that I think is definitional for an open Western world. I can't speak as definitively about much of the East. It may or may not be true. I would be extrapolating, but I can't speak definitively. But it's certainly true in Europe. It's certainly true in the United States, and I think that we have to take that seriously for these matters. So, yeah.
So, last question: how do you think that friendship now in our world is a tool, is a way for people to overcome the problem of conflict, of strangeness?
I love the question. And as you may know, I'm a big devotee of social networking. I believe in it. I don't just mean that it's a gimmick that young people use to somehow say things. I actually believe that it's a recreation. It's a reestablishment in the 21st century of what would have been an organic community. And what do I say that? People say to me, well, why do you tweet so much? And why do you put things on Facebook? And why do you do things like that? Do you really care if somebody goes to the movies? Do you really care where they're having dinner? Do you really care? And the answer to me is absolutely, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't believe that the normal organic experience is knowing about people's lives in bullet points. The natural organic experience is that you happen to know somebody who may not be your closest friend, but you know they're not feeling well. Or perhaps there was a death in the family. Or perhaps they broke up with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Or perhaps they're celebrating a birthday or something like that. And they may not be the closest friend that you would be invited or feel connected, but you know things about them instantially along the way that would be very natural in an organic community. But in the modern world, we never know those things. And so if you see somebody once a year or twice a year, and they sit there and they give you bullet points of what happened to them during the last 6 months, and you barely know them. But on Facebook, as silly as it may be, you know all these things about people that you may only see peripherally, and they may not be your most intimate friends, but they're important to you. And so while you can make, not you, but one can make fun of Facebook, which says, will you be my friend? Can I friend you? But in a way, it's profound. It touches something profound. It works. It doesn't work because some Harvard dropout was brilliant enough to come up with it. It works because he was brilliant enough to perceive that it spoke to a human reality that was necessary. And friendship is not made in the big picture moments. Friendship is made instantaneously. It's made along the way. It's made with small steps. It's made with small bits of understanding. And I'll just conclude, because I know that we're running out of time. I want to conclude with a personal story about that. Within a 10-year period, I lost both my parents. They were both elderly. Neither was tragedy. We both lost. When my father died, when my father died.
Can you repeat this?
Starting there.
When your father died.
Okay.
Is that before?
Okay.
Sorry.
So I want to tell the story to illustrate this based on an experience of my own life, and it's an interesting one. I lost both my parents within a 10-year period. They were both elderly. They were both ill. It was not a tragedy. It's always sad, but it was not a tragedy. But when my father died, I was still working for a prominent organization. I had a very kind of a public role. I was deeply connected in many parts of the community. And a certain number of people came to our home for Shiva, which is the mourning period, the official 7-day mourning period. We're not members of a synagogue. We're connected lots of places, but we're not members of a single synagogue, so it was largely dependent on all of those networks at that time passing the word along. Years later, which was just a couple of 3 years ago at this stage, when my mother died, we were self-employed, so I'm not connected in any official way to any organization, and we work at home and much more informal networking. Mirala put a single notice on Facebook about the fact that my mother died, and when I was observing the 7 days of mourning, what the hours were that we would have services. Many more people came as a result of that single posting on Facebook than came from 8 years earlier when my father died, when it went through perhaps a more traditional way of passing information along. So I give that example, which I think is extraordinary, and I think it tells you something about the way in which communication, friendship, and relationships and community is built during this era. So I don't have an understanding of friendship as this ideal that can only be achieved in some platonic search for, in some abstract way. Friendship is made up of many friend experiences. And they add up. And for some people, in some cases, they add up to a lot where they become a true friend. And that becomes a friendship that really transcends other experiences. But there are other authentic friend experiences that can stand on their own, that have to be valued on their own, that shouldn't be downplayed because they may not be something that's a lifetime or something that's a transformative experience, but nevertheless is authentic on its own. And I take that very seriously, and I think that's what friendship is to me.
Okay, thank you.
It's a wonderful addition